Dr. Victor Bien, when you're doing your talk, you become a doctor again. So, and it's on the extra layer of evolution that we humans have invented. On top of our biological evolution, we now have a process of cultural evolution, and Victor is going to help us understand the transition between these two concepts. Thank you, Victor.
Thanks. Okay. Most of this first part of the talk is based on Francis Fukuyama's book, The Origins of Political Order. Now, I need to just give a little bit of an intro or comment about Francis Fukuyama, because he was a neocon. And so during the Iraq War around that time, he was right in there. But since that time, he's repudiated that position. Around that time, he wrote a book, something like The End of History. I'm not sure whether he wrote it, but there was a train of thought like that. Anyway, he's repudiated all of that. And he used to be a good friend of Paul Wolfowitz, who is a prime neocon, and they don't talk to each other anymore. Francis has become much more sort of taking knowledge as it comes without trying to put any sort of political overlay on it. And he approaches as a political scientist, and he takes an evolutionary approach. So the nature of this book is to try to get a satisfactory explanation of how come that we have the political order of today, and we humanists, for example, have gone along with the Enlightenment, but he says that it's still too much on the surface, that there's a lot more behind the matter than the Enlightenment even. I mean, the Enlightenment accounts for a lot of what it is today, but he's saying it's much deeper than that. And this book demonstrates how deep it is. And so it was actually a Queensland humanist that got me onto this book. She urged me to read it. She said that Philip Adams had advocated this book. It was published in 2011 and said that basically you people should all read it. Anyway, I have started to read it, and it's astonishing. And because he writes from an evolutionary point of view, there was a question that's been bugging me since I became interested in talking about celebrating Darwin Day. Now, we, New South Wales, have been doing it since 2002, and in the early days, as you might expect, our Darwin Day was concentrated on arguing against the creationists, because, we secular people think that the creationists are completely up the creek. And so we did that for a few years, but we got bored doing that, basically, because there's anything new. It is always about the same issue. So, and also because the creationists got into schools, we were running Darwin Days in schools for a little while, that they the moral restriction on the school such a way that we couldn't run a Darwin Day the way that we do just a few years before that. It's like the climate change deniers demand equal time on the BBC or the ABC or whatever, because they think that it's a debatable issue. Or people such as the anti-vaccination movement demand equal time, the creationists demand equal time, and schools step back, and so the principal said, we'll let you run the Darwin Day at our school, it was Kempy High School, if you also allow the creationists to run a debate with you. And we said, we're not interested in debate. And he said, well, you can't run Darwin Day at school. And that was it. That was the end. We just gave going away. What we want to do is celebrate Darwin Day, so what we do is do it in-house and to dwell on the wonders of how powerful evolutionary theory is to explain how we came about and now how society has come about, and which is entirely, quote unquote, a satisfactory explanation. So it's a little bit like when Richard Dawkins says that the world was created by God. And you know how Richard Dawkins says in the God Delusion, well, this is no explanation at all, because all you're doing is saying that the origin of the world order is God. But the natural question is asked, well, how do you account for God? And of course the Christians say, there is no accounting for God, that's it. Right? But if you have a scientific orientation like us, that is totally unsatisfactory. There's got to be more explanation than that. Right, so with that intro, I'll get into it. The evolution of the large human brain led to religion and politics. Evolution of the large human brain for supporting language was an evolutionary advantage, improving survival in competition with other animals. Growing cognitive faculties enabled achievement of abstraction and theory. This, in logical terms, enabled the conceptualization of invisible or supernatural orders, which is religion. Fukuyama engages with the notion that religion is primarily a source of violence by showing that historically it often plays an opposite role, that it is a source of social cohesion. The issue is complicated by in-group versus out-group factors. An extensive discussion is follows in the sections specifically human, where he focuses on chimpanzee politics. I had a bit of a problem with this section when he focused on chimpanzees, because there is another species very close to the chimpanzees, bonobos, who are not violent, and they solve their differences by sexual friendship and so on. But nevertheless, it would seem that the chimpanzee is a more important precursor to the human being than the bonobo. Maybe that's an empirical thing that science might be more clear of later on. Right, the steps in transition. I've been keeping my eyes peeled for a reference which fills in the gaps between the view of humans as biological species out of Africa, about 50,000 years ago, etc., to when human civilization was clearly underway by the ancient philosophers Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, etc. Now that world was about 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. And so, you know, when we talk about evolutionary biology and the rise of the human being, we're talking about 50,000 years ago. So naturally the question comes up, well, what happened in between? How did the chimpanzees, the proto-humans that came from the chimpanzees, developing a large brain, developing consciousness, subsequently got themselves into order, created agriculture, etc. Now that was a big blank, and I was very interested in getting that blank filled in, and this book does it. Now, so in that time slot, so that's what I'm focusing on, because I'm focusing on the transition, right? He talks in terms of band level groupings, which evolved to tribal level groupings, invention of agriculture, and early large-scale human settlements. Now, if you think of a family of chimpanzees, or an early proto-human, you would have father, mother, and offspring, right? And the nearby groups of these families would form into bands to cooperate to catch prey and defend themselves against being prey. And so that's how the word band comes about. And reading this book, I also realised that history of human civilization accounts for the use of the word bandit. So you know, it's sort of in less developed countries, even today, if you go into the outer regions, you've got to watch out for bandits. Well, bandits are sort of like the present day band level troublemaking people. Anyway, as time went on, these bands saw an advantage to cooperate and come into higher level grouping, and so you have tribes. And today we have difficulty with tribes and manifestations of tribalism. The Shiites and the Sunnis is an obvious example. So we have tribes. And there were large-scale developments that was achieved by human beings. The earliest one, it turns out to be, was China. Now, this particular friend, Facebook friend, whom I had not met face to face, said, I'm really interested in the book because this is about the rise of the Chinese civilization. And so by some means which Fukuyama accounts for, the Chinese tribes in that part of the world somehow managed to produce, or come together in such a way to produce what Thomas Hobbes calls the Leviathan. So when we talk about state, quote unquote, we don't mean New South Wales state or if you're in the international context, states, right? United States is a state, Canada is a state, Australia is a state. Now, we're talking about large-scale political order. Australia is a large-scale political order. France, Germany, Russia, right? China. How did these large-scale political orders come about? So this is part of that transition. Right. Now, when you look at this from this point of view, you get a more informed view of how moral values arose. Because up till now, within humans discussion, we tend to talk about altruism and selfishness, and that human beings had to be a bit altruistic because otherwise family survival wouldn't have happened and so forth. And that's sort of fair enough, right? But there's a lot more to it than that. And so when you start reading into it, you find, boy, it starts to fill in big time. And I hope before I finish, I can give you a bit of a flavour of what does come out of that. So the rise of human society and polity, or body politic, via band-level human groupings, fully accounts for the primary seed we give to kin relationships. Because obviously bands are bands of creatures, proto-humans, who were related to each other. They were offspring, cousins, right? And then when you go to tribes, they're still all pretty closely related. And even today, in sort of societies that won't accept modernity, there is nevertheless a lot of kin relationships. Cousins marry and all this sort of stuff. And associated difficulties with sexism in a state-level society, where we've created structures leading us to relate to people generally having nothing to do with kin relationships. See, an important element of modern society is that we relate to each other as citizens. We don't relate as a rel or a relative, right? And that's a very important achievement. Fukuyama shows that religion, which arose, can be categorised into three classes. So religion is sort of intimately tied up with the rise of human culture. And it was very interesting to see that there are three classes of religion. Now in China, you had a very minimalist religion. So the Chinese, as we sort of know today, we're a secular, very secular mob. We're not very religious. You've got Confucianism and so forth. But, you don't hear much of sort of the business of Allah and stuff like that, which you get from the Abrahamic religions. So we know the Abrahamic religions because we're part of it. Yes, John?
In China, there was a lot of stuff about heaven, heaven, the sky,
yes.
that sort of...
Yes. There's they use the word heavenly peace, the order of the heavenly peace. And they do have a supernatural, there is a minimalist supernatural concept, and that is ancestor worship. And so